If one day you lose everything, family, property, health, do you still dare to believe that God is still good? That is not a question for reason. It is a question that makes the soul tremble. For what if all the things you once believed were solid, loved ones, financial stability, dreams, health, and even peace, suddenly vanish in just one day? At that moment, would you still dare to lift your voice in praise? Or would you turn away, challenge the heavens, and abandon the faith that had been nurtured over the years? That question not only resonates in the hearts of those who are suffering today. It was once posed in the ancient land of Uz, in one of the most sacred and intense moments of the history of faith. It was tested on a man named Job, the one whom the Bible records as blameless and upright, fearing God and shunning evil. Job is not just a figure in the Bible. He represents each one of us when a peaceful life suddenly turns into a storm, when prayers seem not to be heard, when suffering piles up and reason becomes obscure. And right in the midst of the deepest anguish, he does not curse, does not give up, but falls down and says, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." Today, we will step into a journey of faith paved with dust and tears, a story not only to be read, but to be lived with. To illuminate the soul, to ask oneself, do I truly believe in the Lord when nothing remains in my hands? This is the story of Job, but it could also be, this is your very own story. There was a man in the land of Uz named Job. That man was complete and upright, feared the Lord, and shunned evil. Not a word issued from his mouth without thought, not an act did he perform without loyalty toward the Creator. He was a man who was highly respected, not only because of his abundant wealth, but also because of his wisdom and kindness. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, and a large herd of livestock, 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 pairs of oxen, and 500 donkeys, along with a vast number of servants. He was the richest man in all the East. But his wealth did not make his heart proud. On the contrary, Job lived a careful life, always valuing righteousness and fearing the Lord above all. Whenever his children held feasts in their respective houses, taking turns according to their birthdays, then after each cycle Job would rise early and offer burnt offerings for each one of them. He was not certain whether they had sinned, but he said, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed the Lord in their hearts." He did not wait until he saw the evil displayed, but acted to prevent wrong. For he knew that evil dwells not only in actions, but also in thoughts. And Job, the upright man, not only kept himself but also stood as a priest between his children and the Lord. Yet, while Job was living his complete life on earth, a heavenly council was taking place in heaven. The angels of the Lord came to present themselves before him, and among them there was one accuser, the one who had fallen from heaven, who roamed the earth like a lion seeking someone to devour, Satan. He did not come with reverence, but with haughty eyes and a voice full of sarcasm. The Lord said to him, "Have you considered my servant Job? For there is no one on earth like him, complete, upright, fearing the Lord and shunning evil." Satan did not deny that Job was complete, but he questioned the reason. He sneered and said, "Does not the Lord surround him with a hedge around his house and around all that he has? His work is blessed by the Lord, and his possessions have increased throughout the land. But stretch out your hand and touch all that he has. He will curse you right there in your presence." A charge not aimed at the action, but aimed at the motive. Satan doubted that a person's faith exists only in favorable circumstances. He said that Job did not truly love the Lord. He only loved what he received from the Lord. That was a challenge not only aimed at man, but also directly at the way the Lord governs his creation. As if he wanted to say, no one loves him sincerely. No one obeys him simply because he is worth obeying. Man obeys for his own benefit. Try taking away the benefit and see. And the Lord, him who is not shaken by insults, but who does not overlook what needs to be proven, allowed the test to occur. He said, "Behold, all that is Job's is in your power. Only do not lay a hand on his person." So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord, carrying with him a malicious scheme. On a fateful day, calamity fell upon Job's house like a raging flood. Bad news followed bad news. First, the Sabaeans came and carried off the oxen and donkeys and killed the servants. Then fire came down from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants that were tending them. Then the Chaldeans divided into 3 bands and carried off the camels and slaughtered the servants. But the greatest calamity did not stop there. While Job's sons and daughters were eating and drinking merrily in the house of their eldest brother, a strong wind came from the desert and struck the house. All perished. Every messenger who reported the news ended with the same sentence: "Only I have escaped to tell you." As if Satan not only wanted to take away the possessions, but also to leave behind a witness so that the painful wound would be salted forever. Job arose, tore his robe, shaved his head, and fell to the ground, but not to curse, rather to worship. He said, "The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord." In all these things Job sinned not, nor did he blame the Lord for being unjust. Job's faith was tested in the fire and was not burned away. But Satan did not give up. Once again he appeared before the Lord, and the Lord said, "Have you considered my servant Job? For he still holds fast to his complete integrity, though you incited me against him without reason." Satan shouted, "Skin for skin. A man is willing to give up everything to keep his life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and flesh. He will curse you right in your presence." And the Lord said, "Behold, he is in your hand. Only spare his life." Satan went out and afflicted Job with sores all over his body, from head to toe. Job took a piece of broken pottery with which he scratched himself, sitting among the ashes. Job's wife, witnessing all these in utter despair, exclaimed, "Do you still hold fast to your complete integrity? Curse the Lord and die." But Job replied, "You speak as one of foolish women. Should we accept good from the Lord and not accept adversity? This is not only patience, but faith tempered in suffering, a faith that does not depend on circumstances, a love that is not bound to blessings. True faith does not need to be protected, but must be proven." Perhaps it is at this moment that each of us needs to pause and ask, if my life were suddenly to lose everything, would I still worship the Lord? If all my dreams were shattered, all the people I love gradually depart, all that I have built swept away by the wind, would I still call him the giver? Perhaps there have been times when we prayed, "Lord, use me." But when illness comes, we cry out, "Why me, O Lord?" Perhaps we have vowed, "May my life belong to you." But when betrayed, when losing a job, when misunderstood, we grit our teeth and ask, "Where are you when I suffer?" We long to be used by the Lord, but are afraid to become the main character in the story of faith that he is writing amidst this stream of suffering. Job was not told that a debate was taking place in heaven. He did not know that he was a living witness for a true faith that both heaven and hell were watching. He only knew one thing: though the Lord was silent, though everything had fallen apart, he was still worthy of his loyalty. After the dreadful days when the heavens and the earth seemed to collapse, when wealth dissipated, children were no more, the body was in pain and the soul was torn apart, Job sat silently amid the ashes of his own life. But the pain did not end there. When flesh and skin had been torn apart, when the blood had ceased to flow because the wound was too deep, then his soul was inflicted with another cut. This time, not coming from an enemy, not coming from calamity, not coming from Satan, but coming from those called friends. 3 friends had heard of the calamity that had befallen Job: Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamahite. They came from 3 different directions of the heavens, meeting by chance at the heap of ashes amid the land of Uz. Each one carried sympathy. Each believed that they were performing a noble deed. They did not come to chat casually, nor did they come to probe. They came to share the pain with a friend whom they had once respected, once admired, once believed to be righteous. When they were still at a distance, as soon as they saw Job, they could not recognize him. The Job they once knew was a man dignified, resolute, highly respected. Now he was just a gaunt, ulcerated figure, sitting amid the ashes with vacant eyes and a body emaciated to the point of no longer being recognizable. The 3 friends burst into loud weeping, tore their robes, sprinkled dust upon their heads, and sat with him for 7 days and 7 nights, No one opened their mouth, for they saw that his pain was too great. That silence, in the very first moment, was the silence of empathy. Not every time are words necessary. In the depths of suffering, presence is the most precious thing. For those 7 days and 7 nights there were no words, no reasoning, no doctrine, only presence. And in that presence Job felt himself somewhat supported. But then, when he opened his mouth to lament his fate, not to blame the Lord, but only to relieve the pain that was tearing his soul apart, then the 3 friends, as if they had just heard something overwhelmingly unbearable, began to change. The first to speak was Eliphaz. He did not come with words of comfort, but with analysis. He spoke in a tone that blended sagacity and disdain, morality and reproach. "Job, you have counseled many, supporting the weak, but now calamity has come upon you, and you have lost heart. Has there ever been an innocent who perished? Has there ever been a righteous man who was cut off? I have seen, whoever sows iniquity reaps calamity." Eliphaz did not speak wrongly, but he used reason to overwhelm a heart that was already torn apart. He did not distinguish between truth and what is appropriate. He placed Job into a framework of reasoning that if you experience calamity, then surely you have sinned. And when a soul in pain is examined under the microscope of judgment, it no longer has room to breathe. Then came Bildad, who said, "The Lord does not pervert justice. If your children have been punished, then they must have sinned. And if you are righteous, he will restore you, making your life more prosperous than before." Those were the words of one who knew nothing of the depths of suffering. Bildad regarded the Lord as a machine of causality. Do good and receive blessing, do evil and be punished. But he did not know that there are times when the Lord does not act in the way we understand, does not bestow blessings according to human standards, does not immediately explain everything that happens. And his words, although spoken with a tone of superiority, were like a knife that further deepened Job's loss of his children. Zophar was the most straightforward. He did not beat around the bush. He said, "Job, would that the Lord would speak to you. For your wickedness is deserving of punishment more than your present punishment. You ought to forsake your sin, and then he will forgive you." Those words, if addressed to a truly wicked person, might be a warning. But when addressed to Job, the one whom the Lord himself had confirmed as complete and upright, they became an insult. Job, who had lost everything, was not only being tested by Satan, but now was also being condemned by his very friends. And the tragedy of spiritual pain is this: when one is prostrate, instead of being lifted up, those close by trample on one to keep one down. Job could bear it no longer. He burst into tears, lamented, and cried out, "You are a sorrowful comfort. If I were in your place, I would not torment the soul of a suffering man with such words, but I would use my mouth to support, I would use my tongue to soothe their hearts." And Job in his pain not only endured the loss, but also endured misunderstanding. This spiritual pain is deeper than physical pain. For when one suffers from bodily pain, one can still find medicine. But when one suffers from the pain of a loved one's words, only the Lord can heal. I once heard a very true saying: when you encounter calamity, the Lord does not change, but people will reveal their true nature. And that is what I learned from Job. In times of prosperity, friends all applaud, brothers all sing praises, neighbors all rejoice. But when adversity strikes, when you lose your job, when your child falls ill, when your house collapses, then you will clearly know who is truly by your side. You will know who truly consoles you, and who only uses doctrine to stab you from behind. And more importantly, you will clearly see whether the Lord is with you or not. He does not speak much. He does not intervene immediately, but he sees. He understands. He is recording every word, every glance, every judgment, and every tear that falls silently from you. Amid the ashes and the sand, Job stood desolate amidst the barrage of his friends. But he did not turn his back on the Lord. Though his heart was filled with questions, though his mouth was full of complaints, he still held fast to one thing. He did not believe that the Lord was unjust. He did not understand, yet he still believed. And that is what made Job the greatest figure of faith under trial. He did not need to understand in order to continue trusting. And through the silence of his friends, he learned loneliness. Through mistaken condemnation, he learned discernment. And through endurance, he learned how to sustain his soul. We live in a world where people are quick to assign blame to one another. When a family falls apart, people whisper, "Surely they did not live pleasing to the Lord." When someone suffers loss, people say, "Surely they are hiding something." But not every calamity is punishment. Not every pain is a consequence. There are sorrows that the Lord permits, not to punish but to refine, not to condemn but to express, not to judge but to elevate faith. And in such times what we need is not condemnation, but a hand to hold ours in silence. Not words of doctrine, but eyes that know how to weep together. Not theological explanations, but silent companionship amid the ashes. Job's 3 friends came with good intentions, but they did not understand what the Lord was doing. They looked at Job with human eyes, while the Lord was looking at him with the eyes of the Creator. And the lesson for us is, be careful when speaking of another's pain. You may end up becoming a tool of judgment rather than an ambassador of healing. Listen before you speak. Weep before you teach. Understand before you expound. For the Lord is still there, not to judge, but to accompany. When Job's cries had become hoarse, when every argument between him and his 3 friends had become an exhausting loop, when no one among the human circle could offer a satisfactory explanation for what had happened, then the silence of heaven suddenly became an unfathomable void. Job, who once sat among the circle of the elders whom no one dared to interrupt, was now pushed into the shadows of the world, where he spoke yet no one listened, cried yet no one answered. He earnestly pleaded for the presence of the Lord, not to have his afflictions healed, nor to reclaim his wealth or children, but to understand why. Why is it that the righteous are crushed like clay under the feet of unseen steps? Why is it that the one who guards himself from sin is mocked by the wicked, spurned by friends, blamed by mankind itself? He waited, day after day, in the midst of outcries and silence, in anger and despair, until his words became a challenge. Oh, that I might confront the Lord as a litigant. Would that he would record all my sins in a book, so that I might read and justify myself. But his words seemed to drift into the void, for the Lord remained silent. And then in the darkness of a soul that was breaking, amid the desert winds blowing through the ashes, the unexpected occurred. The Lord appeared in a whirlwind, not in the dazzling light of heavenly glory, nor in a serene vision or a whispered voice in the night. He came in the midst of the storm, a symbol of power beyond the understanding of man. And he did not come with apologies, not to deliver a report, not to explain why suffering occurs. He came to pose questions, and those questions did not blur the image of a gracious Lord, but rather illuminated the portrait of a glorious Master. He said to Job, "Who is this that uses idle words to darken my counsels? Now gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Declare, if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone while the morning stars sang together and all the heavenly beings shouted for joy?" Job did not answer, for he could not. Not because he was foolish, but because human wisdom could not compare with the omniscience of the Creator. And the whirlwind still raged, carrying questions like hammers, striking down each layer of human pride in wisdom. Have you commanded the morning since your days began, and caused the dawn to know its place, that it might take the earth by the edges, that the wicked be shaken out of it? Have you entered into the storehouses of the snow, or have you seen the storehouses of the hail, which I have reserved for the time of trouble, for the day of battle and war? Each question like a bolt of lightning tearing apart the night within Job's mind. Each question was not only a challenge, but a revelation. The Lord did not need him to answer, for the question itself was the answer. He did not come to say, "Why do you suffer?" but to ask, "Do you know who I am?" And that is the crux of every struggle in faith. Man always seeks an answer to his pain, but the Lord desires to reveal himself. In that holy presence, Job no longer saw himself as a wronged man in need of vindication, but as a small being standing before a wondrous universe where all things are made by the hand of the Lord and operate by his command. He no longer demanded justice because he had seen something greater than justice, the glory of the Creator. And Job cried out, "I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. My words were what I did not understand, things too marvelous for me which I did not know. Before now my ear had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in the dust and ashes." Those words were not words of remorse for sin, since Job was not condemned by the Lord. They were the lament of a man who was too small to dare compel the Lord to answer him. They were the breaking of a soul that after days and months of seeking meaning at last encountered the source of life. Not to meet for healing, but to be transformed. And here is the climax of the entire book of Job. Not the place where he was healed, not the place where he received twice his wealth or children, but the place where he met the Lord. Not through an intermediary, nor through a prophet, nor through doctrine, but meeting him directly in power and glory. And it was that encounter that changed him, not any explanation. We always want to know why. Why cancer? Why loss of children? Why betrayal? Why pray when the Lord remains silent? But the Lord, instead of answering why, calls us to behold him, the one who holds all things. And when we see him, those questions no longer matter as before. For true faith does not require complete understanding, it only requires seeing the one worthy of trust. In theology, this is a revelatory turning point. From, "Why did this happen?" to "Who is the Lord in this?" It is the movement from the realm of reasoning to the realm of worship. And that is what Job, and all of us, need most. For understanding the reasons does not make us stronger, but knowing who the Lord is will make us steadfast, even when we understand nothing at all. The Lord did not come to debate with Job, nor to defend how he governs the universe. He came to reveal himself as the Almighty, but also as the one who sees the suffering man. The one who made the clouds and thunder, but also as the one who appeared in the whirlwind, only to speak to a man sitting among the ashes. And that is the gospel for each one of us. For when everything around us collapses, when friends abandon us, when loved ones misunderstand us, when the body decays and the soul despairs, the Lord will come. Not always in the form you expect, not always with miracles or explanations, but he will come to ask you, "Do you know who I am?" And if your answer is, "Before I had only heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you," then at that moment you will have received something more precious than any explanation. You will have met the Lord. When the whirlwind gradually subsided, when the pronouncements of the Lord had grown silent, then a strange silence fell upon the land of Uz. There were no more accusations, no more charges, no more arrogant questions from mankind or from the darkness. Only a man remained sitting in the dust, yet his soul was standing before the throne. Job, who once was the symbol of righteousness among men, was no longer the same man. Not because he had been healed, for that had not happened, not because he had regained what was lost, for that had not yet come, but he had seen the Lord. And a man who has seen the Lord will never be the same again. Job no longer spoke words to justify himself. He no longer cried out for vindication. He no longer clenched his hands to demand justice, but with those tattered hands he opened them, let go, to grasp a new, profound, and glorious understanding of the Lord. An understanding that did not come from books, not from reasoning, not from favorable experiences, but from the very pinnacle of suffering. And when his heart had been healed, when his soul had been strengthened, when his faith was no longer founded on blessing, but on the very presence of the Holy One, then the Lord began to restore him, not only by miracle, but by a heavenly process. He turned to the three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, those who had once condemned Job with erroneous doctrine, who had once used their tongues to gouge into the righteous man's pain. And he said, "My anger rises against you, because you have not spoken about me as my servant Job has spoken." How strange, for Job had once lamented, had once questioned, had once complained about life, yet the Lord calls him one who speaks what is right about me. For Job, though he struggled, still turned toward the Lord. Though he did not understand, he remained faithful. Though he was broken, he did not depart from the course of faith. But those friends, speaking words that seem right, represented a distorted theology. A Lord who only blesses the good and brings calamity upon the wicked. A conditional faith, a trust with no room for mystery. The Lord commanded those three to offer a sacrifice for atonement, and said, "Go now to my servant Job. Let him pray for you, and I will accept him. If not, I will deal with you according to your foolishness." And thus, Job, whom they once deemed deserving of punishment, now became the one interceding for them. The man who once sat in the dust now became the channel of heavenly forgiveness. Not because Job was esteemed, but because Job had experienced the presence of the Lord in a way that they had never known. And it was there that the restoration began. The Bible records, the Lord restored Job's prosperity when he prayed for his friends. Not when he wept, not when he demanded vindication, but when he prayed for those who had hurt him. The greatest healing does not come when you are compensated, but when you can forgive. And from that heart, a heart that has been refined by fire, a heart no longer bound with anger, no longer bitter, no longer wrathful, the Lord gave back everything. Layer by layer, what was lost, he restored. Not with its old value, but doubled. Job received back the flock of sheep, camels, oxen, and donkeys, all doubled. He had another 7 sons and 3 daughters, as if new life had risen from the ashes of past loss. And the strange thing is, the Bible does not emphasize the names of the sons, but records the names of the 3 daughters, Jemima, Keziah, and Keren-Happuch. 3 names bearing the meanings of beauty, fragrance, and radiance. In the culture of that time, daughters' names were rarely recorded, but here it was the Lord himself who honored them. For what followed was not only compensation, but the revelation of a new order, where women are respected, where beauty is cherished, where family is rebuilt not by wealth, but by mercy. Job lived another 140 years thereafter. He saw his descendants to the 4th generation. And finally, the Bible writes, Job died, old and full of days. But that contentment did not come from doubled wealth or restored reputation or a rebuilt family. The contentment came from a soul no longer agitated, a soul that had been saturated by the answer of heaven, not by words but by presence. Job did not live in the past of hurt. He also did not live in the future of reward. He lived in the present, where his eyes had seen the Lord, and his heart no longer trembled before any circumstance. And that is restoration, not a substitution, but a transformation. The Lord not only gives back what was lost, but he makes us new, people who, without trials, could not understand him in that way. Job did not return to his old position, but stepped into a new life, a life in which he knew the Lord not only with ears, but with the eyes of faith. He was no longer a person who measured righteousness by accomplishments. He no longer founded his faith on wealth or blessing. He was the one who had tasted the presence of the Lord in the storm and had stood firm. One may take everything away, but one cannot take away the true understanding of the Lord. That is why true restoration is not wealth, not children, not reputation, but a soul established upon eternal rock. A soul that knows that, whether in life or death, whether given or lost, whether in glory or in dust, the Lord remains the Lord. And that is the most precious thing a person can receive in this challenging life. There are lessons that can only be written in tears, and there are maturities that cannot come without passing through the red flame of trial. The story of Job is not only the account of a life oppressed, but it is the spiritual mirror for every believer in every age. It is neither ancient nor obsolete, nor intended only for the Jews or for those who live in the East. It is vivid. For suffering still exists, trials still come, and the faith of man still wavers when placed in calamity. But from the ashes of Job, we see the light of 3 timeless truths. The truth about faith, about true comfort, and about a Lord who does not need to be justified but only trusted. First of all, true faith must be refined by fire. Faith is not measured by the number of Bible lessons you have mastered, nor is it substantiated by the number of years you have walked with the Lord. Much less can it be defined by the degree to which you are blessed in material life. True faith only reveals itself when everything else has collapsed. When you have no more possessions, no more loved ones, no more laughter, no more sense of the Lord's presence, then faith is still there, standing alone amid the swirling winds and drifting dust. No trial, no maturity, no suffering, no manifestation of power. Job was once the epitome of righteousness and uprightness before the eyes of man. But after the trial, he became the one whom the Lord himself personally upheld and restored. Why? Because his faith did not shatter when everything collapsed. And that is precisely what every person of faith today needs to ask. If I have everything taken from me, what remains with me? If prayers go unheard, if miracles do not occur, if sickness is not healed, do I still believe that the Lord is good? We often learn about faith as a theory, but it is in the darkest days that we learn where our hearts are placed. True faith is not about avoiding pain, but about stepping through it without departing from the Lord. It is in suffering that we discover in whom we truly believe. And it is at that moment that the true power of the Lord is revealed. Not through immediate deliverance, but through the preservation of the soul amid the storms. The second lesson that Job left is this: comfort is not always found in words. His 3 friends came to him out of compassion, yet in the end, they became the ones who made his soul even more broken. They came with silence, and at that moment, they were right. But when they opened their mouths, they were wrong. For they used reason to analyze a pain that only love has the ability to sustain. They tried to find the cause, they attempted to explain the calamity, they strove to label sin, without knowing that what Job needed was not an explanation, but companionship. How many times in the life of the church do we resemble them, talking much, understanding little, and hurting more than healing? Sometimes the brother beside you does not need a sermon, does not need a Bible verse, does not need prophecy. He only needs a hand to hold his. A presence that does not condemn, a wordless embrace, a synchronized sigh, for it was the Lord himself who comforted Job by his presence, not by explanation. And if we are the image of him on earth, then sometimes the pure silence of empathy is the highest service. There are pains so deep that all words become meaningless. But at that moment, eyes that do not turn away, hands that do not recoil, hearts that do not hastily condemn, will be the priceless gift for the one who is falling. Do not rush to explain, just be present. Do not rush to judge, weep together. Do not rush to tell them, do not doubt the Lord, but walk with them through the abyss, as if you are the silent punctuation beside an unfinished tale of sorrow. The third lesson, perhaps the core of the entire book of Job, is this: the Lord does not need to be justified, he needs to be trusted. Perhaps the most painful thing for Job was not the loss of children, possessions, or health, but the silence of the Lord. He prayed, he cried out, he asked questions, but the Lord did not answer, not until the very end of the book. And when he appeared, he did not say, "Why do you suffer?" He only asked, "Do you know who I am?" And that is enough. In our journey of faith, there will come seasons of spiritual drought. Days when you pray and your words seem to echo off walls. Seasons when you do what is right and yet encounter evil. Circumstances that you cannot understand and the Lord does not explain. But if you understand Job's lesson, you will know that the Lord does not owe us an explanation, but he always gives us something more precious, his presence. He does not let you go through the fire alone. He does not promise that you will not encounter storms, but he promises that he is there. And when you know who the Lord is, then you no longer need to know why. That is the deepest maturity in faith. Not I trust him because he is good to me, but I trust him because he is the Lord. No miracles required, no signs needed, only knowing that he is present. And that is enough to keep living. That is enough to stand firm. That is enough to praise even in the darkest night. And if you, the one reading or listening to these words, are going through calamity, living in a pain that no one understands, wondering if the Lord still remembers you, then please know this: you are not alone. The Lord has never abandoned you. He does not remain silent because he is indifferent. He is using silence to refine something more precious than miracles, true faith. He does not test you to destroy you, but to refine you, to make you a fitting instrument for his glorious purpose. And then will come a day, like Job's, when you too can say, "Before I only heard of the Lord, but now my eyes have seen him." Let calamity become a bridge, not pulling you away from the Lord, but bringing you closer to him than ever before. Please share your story in the comments, for you do not know, your testimony today may be the support for someone on the verge of collapse. And do not forget to follow Jesus Stories, where you will hear real, vivid, and powerful stories of faith from the Bible, where you not only hear the word of the Lord, but see him walking with you every day, every hour, every trial.